Hello everyone, welcome to today's event. Today we will have an introduction to web and application security organized by TechNet, a network for developers. So I'm part of the TechNet network for developers. My name is Bao. I'm working as a customer engineer for data analytics in Google Norway. Nice to meet you everyone, and then hope you enjoy this session. So we are TechNet work for developers. We also has ongoing kind of events as well in the future. So I would like to remind everyone that to sign up for the future events, we will have our annual meeting on 16th of November in like a virtual kind of format. And then after that, we will have an event of code kickoff 1st of December, both in Oslo and Grimstad. Please sign up. So let's talk back to today's event. So today we will have two speakers for the event. So first speaker is Johan. He is the security lead at Bouvet. He will talk about web application security. So in the first talk, he will talk about the open worldwide application security project, top 10 web application risks. We will learn about what they are, why they matter, and how we can avoid them. After that, we will welcome the second speaker, Kenan. He is the security software engineer at Pono. He will talk about how to attack and secure Android applications. So in the second talk, we will change into the world of Android application security. So where stakes is high and the threats are abundant. So Android applications can be attacked in multiple ways. This workshop will give some introduction about some of the most popular attacks, and he will show us the demo as well. Okay, hope you enjoyed. And now I hand over to Johan. Maybe you want to introduce a bit more about yourself as well.
I'll do it in the presentation.
Yeah. Thank you. Perfect. Hello, everyone. This is an introduction to the web application security with OWASP Top 10 here at TechNet. I am Johan. I am the security lead at Bouvet. A little short about me, for those of you who are interested in that type of information. I have a master's degree in cybersecurity. I worked as a security analyst, security engineer, further became a security potato, and then became a security champion, and then afterwards a security architect. I have some certifications as well, and I also have a blog called The Diary of a Security Engineer. It's important to do catchy stuff, so I made a catchy title. ChatGPT helped me with that, so grateful for that. I'm also a very resilient person. I am a Manchester United supporter. It's been tough in the past 10 years. So yeah, resiliency is definitely one of my core traits. So for the people in the room who here are developers, just raise a hand. Approximately 50%. Who here are designers? Any designers? Advisors, architects? 2, 3. Sysadmins, IT operations? No one? I'll raise a hand for them. And other people? Yeah, we got a couple of other people as well. That's great. Cool. A little short about Bouvet. So Bouvet is a Norwegian consultancy firm. We do technology, we do design, we do communications, we do a lot of stuff. We have 1,800 dedicated, awesome people. And our vision is we lead the way and build tomorrow's society. In Norwegian, that is vi går frem og bygger fremtidens samfunn. It sounds a little bit better. In English, it sounds a bit corny, but it is what it is. It's an English presentation, so we'll do what we have to do. So yeah, a little short about the agenda. We'll start off very, very basic. We'll start off with what are web applications, what is cybersecurity, and what are the kind of like the combination of those two. Then we'll move on towards the latest OWASP Top 10, so that's from 2021. We'll have a little Q&A session if we have time for that, and then we'll try to conclude. The conclusion part is 1 minute and 337 seconds. That's lead for those of you who got that. Yeah, and a little disclaimer, I'll try to cover the basics in this presentation, but there's obviously more. There's also some bad movie examples here, and that's on purpose. I've read an article that if you have bad examples, people remember that better than if you have a perfect example. So there will be oversimplifications and bad examples. Be aware. Also, this is CISA's, so that's the American Centralized Agency for Cybersecurity. They've created this model called the Zero Trust model. Architects are familiar with this principle or this model. What's important here is we're going to focus on application workloads and data. Network, device, and identity governance, all those aspects are very important. We can't cover that today, so that's for another time. So let's just start with the absolute basics, like the super duper simple version. You have Ola, and he goes to a web page. Conveniently, it's bouvet.no. And what actually happens in the browser? Well, you go to bouvet.no. The browser's like, hey, haven't really heard about this. So it does the DNS lookup, and it says, hey, okay, bouvet.no, it's on this particular IP address. So you might check that out. This is a very big oversimplification, I know. And then you get redirected to Bouvet.no's web server, and magically a penguin appears on the web page. That's a very, very broad, super simple version of what's actually happens. And for this, we use something called HTTP headers. We use post, put, get, etc. What's important here is the security headers. I'm not saying the other headers are not important. I'm just saying I am only interested in the security headers. And we also often talk about layers. So we say layer 7 very often in cybersecurity. What we refer to then is the TCP IP model or the OSI model, where we talk about layer 7, so application, presentation, and session layer. Other things happen in the other layers. There are more advanced attacks, we know, but let's just keep it simple. And if we kind of distill down what's the core of cybersecurity, it's typically the CIA triad. That is not the Central Intelligence Agency. It stands for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And that typically is the constellation we look at when we talk about cybersecurity. So how many people survived COVID? All of you guys, obviously. This is an image from New York Times. It's about security controls, or what we typically call defense in depth, or the Swiss cheese model. Essentially, what we're trying to say here is, okay, I know that masks alone can't stop COVID, but if we add up all of these security controls, and you have some responsibilities as a person, and I have some responsibilities, then we can assume that we've made our best effort to secure this application or person or whatever the issue might be. And a typical modern application, this again, oversimplification, I know, is typically built with these 4 components. You have some source code, some frameworks and libraries, some APIs, and some virtualized infrastructure, meaning databases. You have some Docker images, whatever. That's fine. As an attacker, which is the more interesting part, is what am I after? Well, I am typically after 2 things. One, I want to inject something into your application, and I want to see it do something funny or make it act weird, right? Out of the normal. That's one thing that I want to do. The second thing I want to do is I want to view source code and look for something juicy. So, if we look at the risk management model from ISO 27000, this is typically how they kind of frame it. It's just like a big course on this, but let's just keep it simple. You have a threat actor, let's say me, I want to do something maliciously. I use a vulnerability like log4shell or log4j, and then I try to attack the application. That's one type of thing. Human does something, uses vulnerability, abuses application. Another one is a threat scenario. So let's say you have a natural disaster, you have a power outage, something like that, and that causes a failure in the application as well. That's typically how we look at cybersecurity. Now, what we try to do and what we try to achieve as security people is putting up enough security controls on the application so that we can say that we have secured the application well enough. And now the golden question is, how many security controls do we need? Well, it depends. It depends on your application. It depends on the value. If you add too many security controls, it might be unusable. If you don't add any at all, then it might be vulnerable. So that dimension is typically where you hire someone like me to figure that out for you. So let's talk a bit about OWASP. So this is the new OWASP top 10. It has broken access control all the way down to server-side request forgery. What's important here, or what's funny here, is that I didn't know this, but OWASP stands for a wasp and a O around. I didn't know this until like last year, so for those of you who didn't know, let's learn something new together. And also a big shout out to the OWASP community. It's an international nonprofit organization. They put out so much good research, so many good papers. Definitely check out their page. It's amazing. So much love to the OWASP community as well. So let's start with the most prominent risk called broken access control. To break or not to break. So just to keep it very, very simple, let's start with a very simple example from the movie Finding Nemo. Nemo starts in this glass cage and he has all his Nemo friends. And what essentially happens is there is a vulnerability. Nemo is able to jump out of his cage, being flushed down the toilet, all the way down to the big real world, right? And that is broken access control. It was important because without it, we wouldn't have Finding Nemo, but still, it's important. So 94% of the applications that were tested had some form of broken access control. What does that mean? So from the OWASP perspective, it's a user that accesses and performs actions beyond their permissions. What does that actually mean? Well, that's typically modification or destruction of data, or execution of business functions, or something that is beyond the authorized limits. And from a practitioner's perspective, so what I see is that there has been an increase in cloud services, and most use identity and access management as their primary security architecture. What do I mean by that? So let's say Azure, right? And then you have your on-premise infrastructure or whatever. You have some roles and some permissions in one part, and then you have other roles and other permissions in another system. And those don't connect well, right? So it's easy to get this wrong. Do you guys agree that this is the hardest thing to master in terms of you guys that are developers? Raise a hand. Yeah, no hands. One hand, great. Yeah, I think this is a very hard, like identity and access management is definitely one of the harder disciplines to master in terms of application security. So yeah, I definitely get that. If we look at broken access control, what are really the main attack and what is the main security controls for defense? So it's bypassing access control checks. So let's say I have a JSON object, and inside that JSON object, I do certain kind of checks, but in certain fields, I don't do a certain check. And that makes that application vulnerable to certain type of injection attacks, for instance. Another one is insecure direct object reference. We're going to talk about that in the next example. Missing access controls for put and post, meaning let's say I have the ability as an authenticated user to put something or make your API delete something because we don't have enough access control to check that. That's a big one. Elevation of privilege. Let's say you use something called a service account or service principal or machine account, and you use that machine account to do something on behalf of you. That's kind of an elevation of privilege. Or you have your regular user account and you try to increase your privileges. So on the defense side, what we do is we typically want to do the server-side access control checks on the server side, not necessarily on the client side. I've seen a lot of people do it in the client side. There might be a beneficial risk or there might be a beneficial reason for that. So I totally get that. You have deny by default, which is essentially least privilege implemented in the application. You have CORS, which is a great security mechanism to control when content can be shared between different domains. That is a big one. Rate limiting API, meaning me as an attacker can't just bombard your application with different type of inputs. I actually have to do some kind of rate limiting so that it's impossible for me as an attacker to blast your application with like 100,000 attempts per second. So rate limiting, for instance, with Apple iPhones, they have that. So you can't just bombard with different type of codes. After 5 minutes, it gets slower. After 10 minutes, it gets slower, etc., etc. So it worsens the experience for the OAuth specification on that one. So if we look at broken access control, let's say I am authenticated as Dobby93, for those of you who love Harry Potter, and I changed that to Voldemort 1337. How did I do that? Well, since I'm already authenticated, the app assumes that everyone inside the app is safe, and thereby I can do indirect object reference. How many people here use Strava? We have some people here. That's great. So did the U.S. Army base people that disclosed their not-so-secret U.S. Army base. And Strava suggests that the military ops should opt out of the heat map and not use their location functionality. Not necessarily the best advice, but yeah, here's a broken access control failure for the U.S. Army. Sorry, guys, for that. The second one is cryptographic failures. Better to encrypt than to be sorry. So for those of you who haven't watched this beautiful movie, it's called Aladdin, and due to very, very poor encryption, Jafar, the evil guy, gets access to the magic lamp. Obviously, it's great because, again, it became a movie out of it, but it's kind of sad as well because Jafar should not have access to that magic lamp. He is a bad guy. Now, how do we keep Jafar away? That's a good question. So if we look at the OWASP perspective, 46% of applications that were tested had some form of cryptographic failure. And it's basically weak algorithms or poor key management. And this is where I think OWASP did something great. What OWASP did is they shifted the name from sensitive data exposure to cryptographic failure, meaning they said it's not the fact that it's open, it's the fact that it lacked encryption in the first place. It's a semantic shift, but it makes sense, and I think it's smart. So from a practitioner's perspective, I see something like AWS buckets, so that's Amazon Web Services. They have buckets that a lot of people have struggled with. So one day, you know that you're following best practice, and the next day, you realize that, oh, I didn't update it or I didn't fix it. Now the configuration is vulnerable, and now an attacker can come in and, basically steal information. This has been a big problem, especially in cloud security. A second one is quantum computing. So that's the way things are going now. And a lot of companies are looking into making quantum-resistant algorithms. We'll not go into that. I am not a cryptographer by any means, but it's definitely a field that is emerging. Another one is confidential computing. I think this is way more near our timeline in terms of what we should look at. So confidential computing is essentially, back in the days, we didn't encrypt anything. Then we realized maybe we should encrypt our disks. And then we realized maybe we should encrypt the transition between us. And then we're realizing now maybe we should encrypt what we're processing as well. So Mark Rusunovich from Azure, the CTO there, has said that this is going to be the new standard. And I don't think Mark is a dumb guy. So yeah, I think that's definitely going in that direction. Anyone here has been struggling with compliance engineering? So let's say you have any standards that you need to follow when you develop for the developers? No? Oh, one guy in the back? Yes, I am typically hired to solve this problem, but this is definitely what I see in terms of like cryptography. So let's look a bit about the attack vectors here. It's default passwords, downgrade attacks, meaning let's say I am using TLS 1.3, which is safe. That's the best cryptographic standard that we have. And then as an attacker, I am forcing you down to use TLS 1.0 so that I can read your messages, I can be a man in the middle. This is, a lot of websites are actually vulnerable to this. So this is definitely something you should check out. I will give a link afterwards in the little break that we have, so you can check out if you're vulnerable to that. And in terms of protection, secret managers for both your passwords, as in like as a commercial user, using something like Keeper or LastPass or something like that. And then for your environment or for your development, you can use something like Key Vault, HashiCorp Vault, etc. We talked about TLS, not going into data classification and protection, but just the general idea there is that you encrypt the data to the standards that you have. So you might have that anything that's above level 3 or something is encrypted with a certain type of standard. So yeah, last year, LastPass had a big no-no. Us in Bouvet used LastPass. That was the last password manager we had. Then we changed that. Basically, so this is a huge story, but the cryptographic story that is interesting is that a threat actor exfiltrated, which means he took out, or she took out, I don't know, encrypted backups, and the encryption key was in the same area that the encrypted backup was. So that's essentially the human equivalent to me having a vault here and the code to the vault right beside it, so that an attacker can just go in and get out whatever they needed. There was also another big no-no, which is that older users from 2018 had 1,000 password iterations, while users today have 100,000, meaning that older users have to fix this themselves. That's also a big no-no. We are paying you as an enterprise password manager to fix this. Why is it on me as an end user to fix what you should have fixed? That's the big no-no here. That was a little rant about LastPass. Sorry about that. The next one is injections. So injections are just like vaccines. We need to validate them. This is one of my favorite movies. This is called Big Hero 6. In this movie, we have Hero. That's the little guy in the middle there. And then we have Baymax. What Hero does is that he realizes his brother is killed and he wants to take revenge. And what does Hero do? He injects something into Baymax, making him evil. So this used to be at first place. Now it's at third place. And the OWASP perspective on this is typically you have malicious data that is executed by an application leading to unauthorized access. If you guys remember that model that I presented in the beginning, you do typically two things as an attacker. You either view the source code or you inject something. So this is typically like one of the main categories here. I think it's gotten a lot better over the years, probably because of the OWASP community and the OWASP top 10. It's very easy as a developer to say, hey, we are actually vulnerable to the #1 risk in the OWASP top 10. Do we want to be that? And the answer is typically no. So now it's kind of gone down because it's an easy argument to make. Try making the same argument for security misconfigurations and insecure design. It's harder. So if you look at attack and defense, SQL injection was very popular during the 2000s all the way up to like 2015. Now command injection is also very popular. I'm not going into all of these. There is just no need, really. Oh yeah, this is actually might be beneficial. So I'm going to use the word cross-site scripting. That means that me as an attacker can launch malicious script running from the user's browser. That is a big no-no. Another one is called cross-site request forgery. That's the one below. That's where a user makes unwanted requests to other sites authenticated as the user. So that's also a big no-no. The way to protect yourself is typically these things. Parameterized queries, as we say in Norwegian, don't take the user input for god fisk or good fish. You have input validation. You have what's called the OWASP ASVS, Application Security Verification Standard. That's a mouthful, but it's very useful as a developer. You also have a web application firewall. If you want to keep people like me away from your application, you get this. The web application firewall keeps me at bay. I did a pen test last month. It's very annoying to deal with. Error handling is also a super important part. A lot of juicy information for me as an attacker is typically given in the error handling. So I'm forcing your application to do something weird, and then I'm forcing, like, give me a server error or something like that. So best practice here is to give just the same error message to everything. Like, give a 404, can't find it, and that's pretty much best practice there. You have content security policy, another really annoying thing as a penetration tester, and also limited database access. These things, the web application firewall and the content security policy, pretty much solid when it comes to defense. So recommend that. Some real-world examples. In 2011, Sony Pictures suffered a breach by a hacker group called LulzSec, and they used a SQL injection. They basically accessed the information of 1 million customers. This is obviously not related to the PSN outage that happened, so PlayStation Network outage that happened in 2011. That made me not able to play FIFA and Call of Duty. That was a tough time for me, but I appreciate that because it's probably the reason I graduated middle school. Yeah. I also put in some philosophical slides because I'm a philosophical guy. One of the things that I put in is security the necessary brakes for software development? I've never heard, and I don't think any of you have heard, a Formula 1 driver complain about having brakes. They have complained about having bad brakes, but they never complain about having brakes. Why do I say this? Because security is typically an analogy to we are breaking our software development, or like we're taking a break. So this is a good analogy for everyone there that thinks security is a good break for your software development process. I agree, but we are a Formula 1 car driving around. I do not own this analogy. I just think it's a good one. So yeah, this is the LastPass architecture over there. The next category is called insecure design. Another example is from Kung Fu Panda, another great movie. Unfortunately, they didn't secure their areas and parameters good enough, so they suffered an attack by the evil person in Kung Fu Panda. So what can the people in Kung Fu Panda have done? Obviously, from the OWASP perspective, this is the category that tries to encompass security controls. If you remember what I said about having multiple security controls and defense in depth, that's essentially OWASP's way to kind of address this. My hope as a practitioner is that we get more cross-functional teams with a security engineer. I obviously know that's not going to happen, but that's my hope. Another perspective on this is that this is kind of the category that tries to encompass all other categories that OWASP doesn't really get to address. But since the OWASP Top 10 has so much gravitas and attention from people, it looks like they try to address it in this instead of somewhere else. So yeah, let's look at insecure design and attack vectors. This is more of a process thing, not necessarily something technical. So it's a lack of security controls and abuse of business logic. We'll look at VIPs. I think most of you use VIPs. And the way to defend yourself is threat modeling. That's one. I absolutely love threat modeling. It's kind of sad that I can't get to talk more about this here. But definitely check out just typing threat modeling, and you'll see a bunch of amazing methodologies on how to do it. Another one is DevSecOps. What does that even mean? It's typically you have development and operations, and you try to address the security part in the middle. And then you have OWASP. Some, for those of you who are tech leads, architects, and other people, great roadmap on how to approach security. So quick raise of hand. How many people uses VIPs here? That's all of you. How many people of you, so everyone raise their hand, how many people uses VIPs as their yellow pages, meaning you get a number that you don't know, and then you type in that number in the VIPs search bar, and you look, who is this person? How many people do that? Okay, so we have some honest souls here. I would say 40%, but essentially, so big shout out to my colleague Cecilia Vian. She had a great article on this, and also a couple of good presentations on this issue as well. Let's say this about VIPs. It's much better than their American counterpart, Venmo. Venmo, you can see like every transaction every person has had in your friend group. So let's just say that VIPs is an amazing product. But this attack vector right here, or not attack vector, business abuse, business logic abuse is definitely prevalent. And I've seen a lot of people use VIPs as their yellow pages. So yeah, funny thing. So let's take a 5-minute break. Just stay in here. That was the instruction that I got. You can check out securityheaders.com or observatory.mozilla.org. Type in the site that you work at, or like the company that you work at, and see what type of security score you get back. This is obviously secure, but it's nice. It's a nice thing to kind of take back to your company and say, hey, we are not secure, or we do not have security headers or something like that. And shout out to my coworker Kenneth as well, that put me on securityheaders.com. So yeah, 5-minute little break. Yeah.
Do you think you will have some Q&A sessions after there are?
I don't think I'll have a live Q&A session. I think I'll have like I'll be around Q&A session. Yeah.
Thank you. So we got a question from the streaming audience. So the question is, what is your opinion on using a SOC, Security Operations Center, and let infected devices stay on, only disconnecting them from the network? Risk if it is reconnected.
So I'll interpret the question as the use of having a security operations center, and if you have an infected device, what is kind of best practice around that? Well, best practice is obviously to try to isolate it. And then if you can, either do a password reset or completely wipe the device. But it kind of depends. When you get more advanced into Security Operations Center, sometimes you want to keep the endpoint or the device infected, because you want to see how the attackers move. So you kind of, it's not intended, but you use it as a honeypot. So a honeypot is essentially, let's see what the attackers do. Maybe they try to use something or a new fancy technique, and we can see if we can abuse that, or not abuse that, but kind of detect that. So my tree attack, for those of you who are familiar with that, a lot of the insights also comes from honeypots. So how the latest attacker development works. So yeah, that was one question. I think we have to move on. I hope some of you found something valuable in the security headers and observatory.mozilla.org, and you can take that back to your projects or whatever you work with and say, hey, we have this score F, we don't want F anymore, we should be at A+ level. So I hope you guys get that. I also put it in a little animation because it's a break. Thank you. So the next one is security misconfiguration, to fix or not to fix. So from the movie Monsters, Inc., we meet Sully, the big blue thing, and Mike Wazowski, the little green thing, and we also have Boo. Boo is a little sneaky one because she can go in and out of doors, and that is not how a Monster Inc. world is configured. It should only be that monsters can go in and out of the system, not humans like Boo. So how do we keep Boo at bay? No pun intended. It is. So let's kind of like dial back. What does OWASP say about security misconfiguration? It occurs when an app is set up without appropriate security settings and leaves it vulnerable to potential threats. And from a practitioner's perspective, this is very similar to the one that we just talked about. What I do see as a trend, though, is developer platforms, meaning a pre-configured platform to increase security and standardization of tooling. So let's say instead of each developer team gets, I need SNCC, and I need this, and I need that, you have a common platform for everyone, and then you use that as kind of like a standardized platform. Nav, for instance, is an example on that. Nav Nice. It looks like they've done a great job on that. And also a shout out to the Security Champions Norway community. For those of you who are not familiar with that, I definitely recommend you check that out. Security Champions Norway. Write that down if you haven't been a part of that group yet. So, is there anyone here that feels like it's hard to master security misconfigurations, or is it easy? Yeah, I see a lot of experienced hands raising their hands. I definitely agree. It's a constant chase. It's been a constant chase since like 2000 something, and I definitely think it's not getting any better. I mean, people are getting better, but the situation is not. So typically, from an attacker perspective, it's the lack of security hardening or the application stack. You have enabled unnecessary ports or service accounts, unchanged default accounts and passwords. Me and an attacker thrive on this. Disable or insecurely configure features in upgraded patches. There's a story with Oracle. The Oracle CEO in 2003 or something like that said that Oracle software is unbreakable. That's a very famous quote. It's also a quote that led to the boom of vulnerabilities in Oracle. A little fun fact about that. Oracle also struggled with patches. So even though they came up with a patch, the root problem wasn't fixed. So a smart one there is not to say that your software is unbreakable. Another one is insecure settings in servers and frameworks. And the last one is the absence of or insecure server security or headers or directives. So what do you do? How do you fix this? It's either trying to, you need to look at it as a layered cake, right? So you need to implement a hardening process for your images. Typically, all of you use some kind of underlying image here. Check out sys hardened images. That's a good place to start. Automate the setup process to reduce the effort required to configure a secure new environment. Maybe a developer platform like Knob has might be beneficial for you. Patch management and configuration management database. This is essential. Review your cloud storage permissions. This is an interesting one because back in the days when Microsoft started patching their software, a lot of IT operations struggled with patching because the patches would come up irregularly. And then they came up with the idea of Patch Tuesday, which is, okay, it's predictable that all of the patches come on this day. A security patch is essentially a fix for whatever security issue you have. But the review of cloud storage permissions are kind of suffering the same fate as early patching, which is essentially they come irregularly and you have to follow what's happening. And it's super hard as devs to kind of continuously monitor everything. So that's probably, I don't know which direction the review cloud storage permissions part is going, but it's definitely going somewhere. And the last part is using security headers. I absolutely love them, so please use that. IoT, Internet of Threats, or Internet of Things. Have anyone of you heard of Mirai Botnet? Yes, some people are nodding, some people are raising their hand. That's good. It's essentially a bunch of poorly configured Internet of Things devices, such as sensors, cameras, etc., that can be abused and misused very easily because they use default credentials into huge ramification attacks. And those attacks, again, are typically because these Internet of Threats things are poorly configured. The next one is vulnerable and outdated components. A cool project have abilities. Some of them have vulnerabilities. NPM audit. For those of you who have watched this show, it's called Mr. Robot, and he absolutely thrives. Elliot thrives on vulnerable components. So how do we keep someone like Elliot at bay? So a software bug, if we kind of dial it back, is a it's a bug with a security implication, and that's what we call a vulnerability. And it involves using components with known vulnerabilities in the application. So from a practitioner's perspective, we see that this is very popular, a popular issue. And the hardest thing to manage is time, because as devs, we don't really have that much time, and we have to fix a bunch of things, and a bunch of new features are coming up. And in React, if you type in npm audit, it releases all hell for those of you who have done that and not be. I see someone smiling over there. I know what you're feeling. I'm feeling that too. But yeah, that absolutely releases hell. But that is how React is built, or like npm is built. So for the next generation of web application folks, please look into this issue. The last issue is continuous monitoring. So continuously monitoring which third-party libraries you're using, seeing if they're vulnerable or not, and if you have some kind of like vulnerability in some of them, is a difficult job. So how many of you struggle with this, third-party libraries? A lot of people, yep, people are raising their hand. I definitely agree. This is probably going to be number one in the next iteration. I think that's at least my prediction. So yeah, vulnerable third-party components, libraries, files, etc. Is typically the attack vector. And how do you monitor this? You have CVE, National Vulnerability Database, CISA, who have their actively exploited list, WWE, Worldwide Wrestling Entertainment. I just had to put it in there to break up the acronyms. You have tools like SNCC, OWASP Dependency Check, Dependabot, and it's typically more a process issue than it is a technical issue, this thing. For those of you who know Panama Papers, it's a huge leak of 11 million confidential documents. You should look it up on Wikipedia and see if there's any celebrities that you know. I haven't found any Norwegian ones, but I found a bunch of Swedes, corrupt Swedes. Lionel Messi was actually on this list, so yeah, big shout out to him. WordPress used, or Drupal CMS and WordPress had a vulnerability, and that was exploited. It was in a third-party thing, but yeah, it resulted in something cool. So also, we also have Log4j. A lot of you probably experienced something with this. Very famous Java logging library. And essentially, what's kind of bad with Log4j is the fact that you can be unauthenticated as an attacker and do remote code execution. That's a big, big no-no, and that's why it got so much attention as well. We also have, for those of you who are interested, we also have a security course at Bouvet. Kind of nice time to plug in. So if you guys want to test this out and get more hands-on experience with this, please check that course out. Yeah, we also have what's new versus what's still there. That's an ongoing discussion. We often prioritize what's new and shiny over what's actually needed. And the problem with that is that we actually don't prioritize the infrastructure. We just prioritize what's popping up. Oh, Log4j popped up. Well, we should have hardened our infrastructure in the first place. Oh no, and then the next thing happened, and the next thing happened. So we focus on what's new and shiny, and we kind of forget the underlying infrastructure, which is the hard, unsexy job that we actually have to do. So another philosophical point here, Mr. Philosophical Guy. So you have identification and authentication failure. It's on number 7 on the list. And it's essentially you as a user, that you haven't protected your user identity, and there are multiple weaknesses in your application due to that. From a practitioner's perspective, what I see is that most customers use some form of hybrid constellation between Active Directory on-premise, and they use Azure AD in the cloud. And that's typically where most of the identity and access management issues kind of is, or that's the architecture that we typically discuss. I won't go through every attack here. What's important is how you defend yourself. So typically what I as an attacker look for is, can I do any kind of credential stuffing? Meaning, can I bombard your application with usernames and passwords, with known passwords, and see if I come through? How do we stop this? Rate limiting is typically one. Another one is using multi-factor authentication on your end users. Don't use any default credentials. Having a proper API key management. This is a big thing, actually. I see a lot of this in source code. It should not be in the source code, people. So please don't leave your API keys there. Otherwise, someone like me will come up and snap it up. Session ID, don't expose, enumerate, or create random values for that. And it's typically stored in the HTTP secure cookie. Don't store that in the URL. That's also a big no-no. A fun fact about NIST is that for security questions, they recommend you not, and I repeat, not using the actual information. They recommend you instead generating up a random string value and using that. So for instance, I went to Nissen videregående skole and I get a question, what is your high school? Well, it's very obvious that it's Nissen, because if you Google that, then you can find that. That is not my actual videregående skole. I will not tell you guys that, but just an example over there. So yeah, number 8 is software integrity data and data integrity failures. Sometimes I wish I was a bug that could be smacked instead of fixed. I don't know what I mean by these small texts. It's supposed to be philosophical. In the real world, the CD project behind Cyberpunk in 2021 had a software bug in a popular video game that led to attackers being able to execute malicious code, and that affected 100 million players. We're talking names, addresses, credit card numbers, completely owned. And that was pretty bad, all due to one software bug. Now the question is, how do we prevent this? Well, it's a bit difficult. Missing or weak integrity checks makes software data manipulation possible. That's kind of the OWASP perspective. I've seen an increase in this thing called software bill of materials. It's becoming more of a regulatory thing, meaning that it's being enforced. So you have to basically describe what your tech stack is publicly, saying, okay, I have a backend that's Django, I have a front end that's React, etc., etc. So actually getting you as a developer, architect, and business to kind of force you to say, okay, this is the principal choices that we made. Yes, and then we have untrusted sources and insecure CI/CD pipelines. That's typically the attack vectors here. Here are some of the defenses. Some might apply. You can check SNCC, for instance, for doing your due diligence when picking a packet or a package. You can do integrity checks on serialized data, meaning, let's say I get a huge JSON object, and what I do is I serialize it or deserialize it in a particular order. And me as an attacker, I try to abuse this. So I try to switch up the orders to see how can I make the application do something that it should not do. Let's see here. The next one, or almost last one, is security logging and monitoring failures. So we don't see anything, and that's why we are secure. That's typically something I've heard. So Randall from Monster Inc. again, he's a very sly guy. He can actually kind of like camouflage himself and be undetected. So this is another problem from Monster Inc. They really need to ramp up their security. And it's hard to check. It's hard to kind of see how many people are struggling with logging and monitoring because you don't have any numbers to actually prove it. So this is a big one. It's typically prevalent when you're under an attack, but that's kind of the last situation you want to be in, to be like, hey, we struggle with logging. As a practitioner, I started as a SOC analyst, so this is often a forgotten perspective. Sensitive data is typically stored in the log. That's something else I've discovered. And logs are only stored in silos or in local storages, which is also not good. You want to centralize that so you can get that intelligence out. this is kind of how I feel about the whole thing. A bunch of security cameras are watching the same area, and the rest of the area is totally unwatched. So as an attacker, I want to turn off the logging and monitoring. I want to do denial of service over flooding, or I want to alert or create alert fatigue in the security operations people, meaning I want to make them tired of all the logs that are constantly popping up. And essentially what you should do is log your high-value targets and ensure that you log in all or log all access controls and the server-side input and validation. Now, the question that I typically get the most is, what should I log? And I am no coward, so I will give you the advice that I typically give. You want to log who, what, when, where, and how, and typically why. And these are also the logs that I typically want. So access logs, network, Azure AD or identity logs, and content delivery networks. That's typically what I want. I typically want more, but there's also limitations on that. The last one is server-side request forgery. So that means, for instance, in the movie The Matrix, for those of you who watched that, Neo sends a request to the Matrix, and the Matrix controls the robots. And that's an example. It's a very hard example to kind of find a movie for. The OWASP perspective here is essentially an attacker tricks the application into making unwanted requests to other systems. And an example of this is what we can look at here. So let's say I have the URL of the page, and then I add, for instance, localhost or the one below, which is typically like admin access to your router. And how you protect yourself is completely basic. It's whitelisting, network layer protection, meaning separating your network, deny by default, logging, sanitize and validate, and disable HTTP redirects. So yeah, that was pretty much all of the top 10 risks. You should now be totally equipped to handle the real world. I know, it's not that simple. I don't think we have time for questions. Can I get a nod or...
I think we don't have much time for the questions, but we will have a break soon.
Okay, I'll be finished soon. I have some resources here for those of you who are watching online and also those of you who are here. Here are most of the resources that I've used and talked about today. So if you want to take a photo of that, please feel free to do so. I'll also publish this afterwards. The security controls that I've talked about today is content security policies or content security policy, web application firewall, course, security headers, TLS, session ID, HTTP secure, OAuth, and OIDC. There's also more advanced topics. This is kind of scratching the surface. So if you guys want more advanced topics, please ask for this. And this is probably a cool slide. If you now feel inspired and you're like, hey, what should we do? What should we do next? You can say, hey, I watched this amazing guy and he said all of these fancy things and now he was like, try this. So if you guys want, here's a roadmap. And finally, good luck on your journey as security champions, because that is what you guys are. You are champions of security. And I hope you guys have a lovely, lovely day. Thank you.